An old man sits in the dark, listening to the rain. He is 600 years old. He is sealed inside a wooden box the size of a small ship. And around him is the smell of every animal that walks or crawls or flies. His wife is somewhere in the dark beside him. His sons are there too. And above them, on the roof, is a sound none of them has ever heard before, because until this week, it had never once rained on the earth. Now it will not stop. Not for a day, not for a week, for 40 days and 40 nights of water, until the world he knew is gone, and something washed and silent takes its place. His name is Noah, and this is the first time in the Bible you meet the number 40. It will not be the last. You have seen this number your whole life. If you grew up anywhere near a church, 40 days of rain, 40 years in the desert, 40 days on the mountain, 40 days of fasting, and most people file it away as a kind of holy round number, the way we might say 100 times, without meaning exactly 100. Just biblical decoration, a number the ancient writers happen to like. But here is what most people miss. Every single time that number appears, and it appears far more than you think, it marks the exact same shape. The same kind of moment. A span of testing, in some kind of wilderness. Standing right before a door that is about to open. 40 is never the decoration. 40 is the doorway. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So this is not a story about a number. This is not a story about rain, or a mountain, or a stretch of desert. This is not a story about ancient people in robes you will never meet and can barely imagine. This is a story about a shape, the precise shape of what God does to a person in the dark, right before he changes them forever. We are going to walk through every major 40 in this book. The flood, the mountain, the wandering, the giant, the prophet who wanted to die, the city that got a countdown. And there is one wilderness, near the end, where the pattern does something it never does anywhere else, where 40 days end not in another broken human being, but in the only man who ever walked out of the desert having passed the test completely. We will get to that desert. But not yet. First, the rain. The rain fell for 40 days. And when it stopped, Noah did not throw open the door. He waited. He sent out a raven. He sent out a dove. And it came back with nothing. He waited again, and this is the first thing the number 40 will teach you. Before you have even met anyone else in this book, the 40 is not the whole story. The 40 is only the part in the dark. What matters is what walks out on the other side. Because a man went into that box, and a whole washed world came out of it. The old earth, with all its violence, was gone. The first thing Noah does on dry ground is build an altar and breathe clean air. Destruction went in, new creation came out. That is the shape. Hold on to it, because you are about to watch it happen again and again with different faces. Now go up a mountain. Centuries later, there is a man standing at the base of a mountain that is on fire at the top. Thunder, smoke, a trumpet blast getting louder instead of softer. Every other person is terrified and begs him to go up alone. So he does. He climbs into the cloud on Mount Sinai, and he stays there, no bread, no water, for 40 days and 40 nights. His name is Moses, and you should stop for a second on what 40 days with no food and no water actually means. Because a human body cannot survive that. This is not a camping trip. This is a man kept alive by the presence of God in a cloud. Long enough to receive the words that will shape every legal system in the Western world. And when he comes down, his face is glowing. He does not know it, but the people can barely look at him. He went up an ordinary man. He came down carrying light in his skin. The shape again. Something goes into the dark, into the fasting, into the wilderness of that cloud. Something changed comes out. But here is what most people miss about Moses. His entire life was 3 40s. Stacked on top of each other. Not one wilderness. 3. And I am going to show you all 3 before we are done. Because when you see them lined up, you will understand something about your own waiting that the number was trying to tell you all along. Remember that. 3 40s. One man. Now stay with the mountain a moment longer. Because grief is coming. While Moses is up in the light, the people at the bottom are melting their gold into a calf and dancing around it. He comes down glowing, and walks straight into a betrayal. The tablets, written by the finger of God, shatter on the rocks. The 40 on the mountain was holy. What waited at the bottom of it broke his heart. That is the second thing 40 teaches you. The wilderness changes you. It does not promise the world will have changed to meet you. So the people wander, and this is the 40 most of us have heard about and least understood. Israel stands at the edge of the promised land. 12 men are sent in to scout it. They are gone for exactly 40 days. 10 of them come back shaking. There are giants in there. We look like grasshoppers. We can't. Only 2 say go. And because the whole nation believes the 10, God gives them a sentence that should stop you cold. A day for a year. 40 days you search the land. He says. So 40 years you will wander in this desert, 1 year for every day. The number of the test becomes the number of the sentence. The very same 40, turned inside out. The Hebrew word here is arba'im. It simply means 40, but to the people hearing these stories around a fire, arba'im was never just a count on the fingers. It had become a sound that meant something. A full and God-appointed span. Long enough to strip a person down. Long enough to bury an old self in the sand. Because that is exactly what those 40 years did. An entire generation that did not believe walked in circles until they died in the dust. It sounds like nothing but punishment. And it would be, except for one detail almost everyone skips. Their children made it in. The 40 years were not the end. They were the corridor, on the far side of that desert. A new generation, people who had been born in the wilderness. Who knew nothing but wandering, crossed a river on dry ground into the land their parents were too afraid to enter. Destruction of the old, emergence of the new, the same shape as the flood, the same shape as the mountain, just slower, and sadder, and finally, on the other side of all that grief, full of hope. So look at what you already have. 3 stories. A boat, a mountain, a desert, 3 completely different men and moments. And underneath all 3, the exact same shape, worn like a fingerprint. 40 is the length of the corridor between who you were and who you are about to become. And we are only getting started. Let me stop here for just a moment. Because we are standing right in the middle of something. Look at what the number has already shown you. A flood, a mountain, a desert, 3 men in 3 kinds of dark. And underneath every one of them, the same quiet shape, a span of testing. And then a door. If this is landing on you the way it lands on me, do me one small favor and subscribe. Because the second half of this is where it stops being history and starts being a mirror. Because so far, every 40 we have looked at happened to somebody else. A man on a boat. A prophet on a mountain. A nation in the sand. That is about to change. The next 40s are smaller. And closer. And they cut nearer to the bone. A soldier frozen in fear. A prophet who begged God to let him die. A whole city handed a countdown. And then, at the very end, the one desert where everything the number has been building toward finally breaks open. So stay with me. It gets more personal from here. Before we go on, I owe you a promise. I told you Moses' whole life was 3 40s. Here they are. He spent his first 40 years as a prince in Egypt, raised in Pharaoh's palace, wearing the finest linen in the ancient world. Then he killed a man, and ran, and spent the next 40 years as a nobody, a shepherd in the desert of Midian. Watching someone else's sheep, forgotten, and only then, at 80 years old, did God speak to him from a burning bush and hand him the last 40 years leading a nation out of slavery. 40 a prince, 40 a shepherd, 40 a deliverer, 120 years. Cut into 3 clean 40s. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, outside the Bible, for a Roman audience, records these same spans as plain history. The wilderness generation dying off exactly as the text says. And here is why that should matter to you. The 40 years Moses spent as a forgotten shepherd looked like the wasted middle of his life. Nothing was happening, no one was watching, he was just an old man in the sand. And that was the 40 God used to build the only man humble enough to lead. The empty stretch was not the interruption of his calling, it was the preparation for it. Keep that in your pocket. We will need it soon. Now come to a valley. And meet a giant. There is a Philistine champion named Goliath, nearly 9 feet tall, in bronze armor that weighs more than a grown man. And for 40 days, morning and evening, he walks out into the valley and dares Israel to send someone to fight him. 40 days. Nobody moves. An entire army of trained soldiers stands frozen while a giant humiliates their God to their faces. Twice a day, for almost 6 weeks. Sit in that for a second. Because this is a different flavor of 40. This is not a flood or a fast. This is the 40 of unbearable waiting. The 40 where nothing is happening and it is killing you. Where the threat just keeps showing up. Every morning. And you have no answer. And then, on day 40, a teenager who came to deliver bread to his brothers hears the giant, and cannot understand why everyone is afraid. The 40 days of terror end in about 40 seconds with a stone and a sling. The waiting was long. The deliverance was fast. That is almost always how the number works. Now watch what happens to a man who has already won. Elijah has just called down fire from heaven in front of the whole nation. The greatest spiritual victory of his life. And the very next day, one woman, Queen Jezebel, sends him a threat. And this fearless prophet runs for his life into the desert, sits down under a broom tree, and asks God to let him die. This is the man who defeated 400 prophets. And now he wants to be dead. An angel feeds him, and on the strength of that food, Elijah walks for 40 days and 40 nights. All the way to the same mountain where Moses met God. He goes into a cave, and he waits for God in wind, and in an earthquake, and in fire, and God is in none of them. And then comes a sound the old translations call a still, small voice, a whisper. Here is a thing hidden in the Hebrew that most people never hear. The word for wilderness is midbar, and buried inside it is the root that also gives the Hebrew word, davar, which means word, or speech. The wilderness and the word share the same bones. To the ancient ear, the midbar was, by its very letters, the place where the voice speaks. Not in the fire, not in the earthquake, in the desert, in the quiet. After the 40, Elijah went into that 40-day walk wanting to die. He came out with a whisper, a new commission, and a successor, the same shape. Collapse went in, calling came out. But the strangest 40 in the whole book might belong to a city that did not even worship God. A reluctant prophet named Jonah, who has already run from God. Already been swallowed by a fish. Already been spit back onto dry land, finally walks into Nineveh, the capital of Israel's most brutal enemy. And he preaches the shortest, angriest sermon in the Bible. 8 words, more or less, 40 days, and Nineveh is overthrown. That is it, no altar call, no promise of mercy, just a countdown, 40 days. And here is what should stop you. God did not have to give them 40 days. He could have said 40 minutes. He could have said now. But even a pagan city, even Israel's worst enemy, is handed a 40, a span, a window, a corridor, a chance to walk into the dark as one thing and come out as another. And astonishingly, they do. The whole city turns. The 40 was never really a threat. It was mercy, wearing the mask of a deadline. So now count them with me. The flood, the mountain, the wandering, Moses' 3 lifetimes, the giant in the valley, the prophet under the tree, the city with the countdown. 7 times, at least, and every single one the same shape, worn like a fingerprint into the oldest stories we have. A span of testing, in a wilderness, right before a door. And every one of them was leading to one final desert. The one I told you about at the very beginning. The one where the pattern does not repeat. It is time. There is a man alone in a desert, and he has not eaten in 40 days. The Judean wilderness is not sand and gentle dunes. It is broken rock and heat and silence. A place where the ground itself looks cursed. And into that place, at the very start of everything he came to do, walks Jesus of Nazareth. 40 days, no food. The same span as Moses on the mountain. The same span as the flood. The same span, 1 year for each day. As the nation that failed in the sand. And that last one is the key that unlocks the whole book. Because think about where Israel is when their 40 begins. They have just come out of Egypt. Through the water, called God's son out of that land, and then they are driven into a wilderness to be tested. And they fail. They grumble about bread. They demand proof. They bow to false gods. 40 years of failing the same test. Over and over. Now watch Jesus. He has just come up out of the water of baptism. Called God's son from heaven with a voice everyone could hear. And then he is driven into a wilderness to be tested. The exact same setup. The exact same 40. And in the 3 temptations that follow. The tempter goes straight for the 3 things Israel broke on. Bread, proof, worship. Make these stones bread. And where Israel grumbled for food. Jesus says man does not live on bread alone. Throw yourself down and make God prove he'll catch you. and where Israel demanded proof. Jesus says, do not put God to the test. Bow to me and take the whole world the easy way, and where Israel bowed to a golden calf. Jesus says, worship God, and Him only. The Greek word running underneath this whole scene is perismos. And here is the strange thing about it, it is one word that means two opposite things. It can mean the temptation that destroys you, and it can mean the testing that proves you. The very same trial, the 40 decides which one it becomes. For Israel, the 40 became the thing that destroyed them. For Jesus, the same 40 became the thing that proved Him. Where every wilderness before ended with a broken human being carried through by the mercy of God, this one ends with a human being who walks out having passed completely, the second Adam, doing in a desert what the first Adam could not do in a garden. The pattern does not just repeat here. The pattern reverses. Every 40 before this one was God changing a person in the dark. This 40 is a person walking into the dark and defeating what was waiting there. That is the desert I promised you at the very beginning. That is the one wilderness where the shape finally breaks open. And if you are still telling yourself this is ancient history that has nothing to do with your Tuesday, then let me show you the 40 you have been carrying in your own body this entire time and never once noticed. A human pregnancy is 40 weeks. Every single person listening to my voice right now spent 40 weeks in the dark. Hidden, unseen, unable to do anything at all but wait and be formed. You did not earn those 40 weeks. You did not shorten them. You could not see the world that was coming. Could not imagine light or air or a face looking back at you. You were simply held in the dark, unformed, and then, in one violent, holy moment, brought out into a life you could never have pictured from the inside. The 40 was never the punishment. It was the womb. That is what the number has been whispering across 4,000 years and 7 stories. The flood was a womb the world came out of. The mountain was a womb Moses came down from with light in his face. The desert was a womb that carried a fearful generation and delivered their children into a promise. Augustine, 1600 years ago, said 40 is the number of this whole life, our entire stretch of testing and pilgrimage before we are finally born into eternity. 4, he said, for the 4 corners of the world, 10 for the commandments, the whole world, living out its whole 40. So here is the question the number has been walking you toward this entire time. What if the emptiest stretch of your life, the wandering, the waiting, the year nothing grew, the season God went quiet, the wilderness you are standing in the middle of right now and cannot see the end of, what if it was never a punishment at all? What if it was never God forgetting you? What if it is a 40, a corridor, a cocoon, a womb, the dark between who you were and who you are about to become? Because there is one last 40 in the book, and it comes after the worst thing that ever happened. After the cross, after the tomb, for 40 days, the risen Jesus walks the earth, appearing to his friends, eating fish on a beach, showing the scars in his hands, 40 days between resurrection and ascension. Even on the far side of death itself, the shape holds 40 days, and then a door, and then glory. The number never lied to you, not once. So let me tell you what this was never about. This was not about a number. This was not about counting how many times a word shows up in an old book. This was not about the flood, or the mountain, or the desert, or the giant, or the whisper, or the empty tomb. This was about a shape. And now that you have seen it, you get to carry 3 things out of here with you. The first one is simple. 40 is never random, not once in the whole book. Every time it appears, it marks the same thing, a stretch of testing, in some kind of wilderness, standing right in front of a door that is about to open. It is not decoration, it is the most consistent pattern in the Bible, hiding in plain sight, and now you can see it everywhere. The second one is closer. If you are in a wilderness right now, you are allowed to count it differently. That season that feels like wasted time, the wandering, the waiting, the stretch where nothing seems to grow, may not be a dead end at all. It may be a corridor. And the God who has never once wasted a wilderness in 4,000 years of stories is not likely to start wasting yours. And the third one is the one I actually want you to fall asleep thinking about tonight. You were formed by a 40 before you ever took a breath. 40 weeks in the dark, held and hidden and shaped for a world you could not yet imagine. That is how you got here. That is how all of it works. God has never wasted a wilderness. Not the world's. Under 40 days of rain. Not a nation's. Through 40 years of sand. Not his own sons. Through 40 days of hunger and a voice that would not stop tempting him. And he is not wasting yours. The dark you are in is not the end of the story. It never once was. It is the 40. And the door is coming. So let me ask you something. And I read these. So tell me the truth. Which 40 are you standing in right now? The flood, when everything you knew got washed away. The mountain, where God feels close but the world at the bottom broke your heart. The desert, where you have been walking in circles longer than you can bear. Or the wait, the 40 mornings the giant keeps showing up and you still have no answer. Tell me below. I read them. If this changed the way you will read one word for the rest of your life. Subscribe. Because we do this every week, we find the pattern hiding under the stories you thought you already knew. The old man sat in the dark and listened to the rain for 40 days. He did not know a washed world was waiting on the other side of the water. Neither do you. But it is.